Hi, the book I'm going to be reviewing today is called Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley. Um, this book, it was made by him and his creative team of Jason Fisher, Nathan Fairbairn, and Dustin Harbin. They're all mentioned in the back of his book. This book is centered around Katie. We don't really get her last name, but this book is centered around her and her restaurant called Seconds. She's a young chef that wants to move on to a new restaurant, and now she's leaving her old home behind, which she sort of describes as a purgatory because she feels like she wants to live up to her potential. And that's where the main conflict of the book is, in her trying to be better than herself, and not accepting her mistakes. Because, as it turns out, the house spirit, which she calls Liz, she sort of gives her a magic mushroom that says you eat it, you write down your mistake, and then you go to sleep, and then the next day it's fixed. Throughout this 323 page book, we find that she fixes one mistake, but then goes on to another, and then another, and then another, until she completely rearranges her whole life and she can't even recognize it anymore. This is a true graphic novel because all the whole story is told within this book, and no new issues were made. This wasn't like a monthly thing. This wasn't released in like packages. It was all just centered around this book. One thing I would say is the page breaks are they're pretty relevant. The first page break happens around page 73 with her first revision. At first, she doesn't really believe in all of this, but by the end of it, she's convinced that this is actually happening, and that it ends like the first act ends basically of her kind of like discovering that this is really happening, because this all started in the beginning when her friend Hazel, an employee in the store, burned her hands when she was making out with the head chef. And she wanted to fix that mistake because she hurt somebody due to her selfishness. And so the house spirit gives her a chance to do that by eating the mushroom. And at first, that was that. But throughout the different encounters of the story, she starts trying to redo like nights where she's too nervous or she's messing up, and then it eventually goes to her trying to remake her relationship happen, and then the whole vibe of the story changes because she's just changing too much, and now she's not even sure where she is anymore. The story has a very solid arc because throughout the whole story, everything's changing. Katie is really like, her main flaw, the thing that got her into this story is the thing that's kind of like pushing it forward, and that's her mistakes. Her mistakes keep kind of piling on and catching up to her, and things she could have simply accepted before are sort of coming and chasing after her. As you could see in one of these pages, she just takes to the concept that she could kind of like change anything. And I'm sorry if this is backwards, but in this, she's having a conversation with Liz about about can she borrow 10-12 grand because she's her new restaurant is kind of like having some issues. So Liz is suggesting that she stop eating the mushrooms because there are dire consequences, and we find out later in the story, spoilers if you actually want to read this, that every time she eats a mushroom, she's basically going to another timeline in which that mistake didn't happen. And now she's playing with time, and she's playing with reality too much, which eventually leads to kind of like a whole sense of weirdness where skeletons and humans start being in the restaurant together. It got really weird, but in an explainable way. This story really does have great transitions. And you really get a sense of like going from new place to another, mainly through these moments right here. And if you can't read that, this is a revision. She's basically trying to like redo her life, but at this point of the story, like there's something in the house that's really like chasing after her. The more revisions she's doing, there's a deep darkness lurking behind there in the corner. I feel like these transitions really do help overall for the story, and really help us float through the story a lot better, because you could see it basically marks down each point where she makes a change in the timeline, and you could actually keep up with her as each change is going along. The directional flow in this book is actually really amazing. In the sense that it's simple and really compact. These pages are all really square-like, but it makes use of its very limited space. It just really flows nicely across the page, and it sort of gets us into the mood where like you could read one page and then another and then another and then another and then another. Overall, I would definitely recommend Seconds to any of my classmates, because at the end of the day, this is a really relatable story about a girl who's who's at a set place in her life but wants more for herself, but really would rather not have the burden of her mistakes following her. And this is just about accepting mistakes and the errors you do in your life as is, and not trying to change to have the perfect life, because you could end up having a life you don't even know at the end. And Seconds was a really down-to-earth book from his last book, Scott Pilgrim, which I equally love just as much, but I just felt like I got more from this story in general. I'm sorry if, I messed up, but this is definitely a great book. I would definitely recommend this to anybody in the class. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys. So peace. I hope I didn't mess up too much.